Before we begin our journey through the veiled doorways of humanity's most guarded spiritual traditions, pause for a moment. Consider that in every corner of our world, across vast stretches of time, our ancestors created elaborate rituals centered around a paradoxical truth. To truly live, one must first learn to die. Not physical death, but something perhaps more frightening. The dissolution of everything you believe yourself to be. What if I told you that right now, in this moment, much of what you experience as you is an illusion? That beneath your name, your history, your personality traits, and your most cherished beliefs lies something vast, luminous, and unbound by the limitations of individual identity. This isn't mere philosophy. It's the foundational insight that powered history's most profound mystery schools and initiation rites. From the torch-lit caves of Eleusis in ancient Greece to the stone chambers of Mithraic temples, from the wind-swept Himalayan monasteries to the modern clinical settings where psychedelic therapy unfolds, humans have been engineering experiences of ego dissolution for thousands of years. These weren't frivolous spiritual entertainments, but carefully orchestrated journeys designed to fundamentally transform the initiate's relationship with existence itself. Fellow traveler on this strange journey called life, I invite you not as a passive viewer, but as a potential initiate. The knowledge we'll explore today was once reserved exclusively for those who had proven their worthiness through years of preparation and preliminary trials. The details of these sacred technologies were protected by oaths of silence, so severe that even in ancient Greece, revealing the secrets of the Eleusinian Mysteries was punishable by death. But you live in an extraordinary time. Perhaps the first era in human history where these once guarded teachings are becoming accessible to anyone with the courage and discernment to approach them with proper reverence. As we journey together beyond the veil that separates ordinary consciousness from its sacred source, I ask only that you bring your full presence and an open heart. Our expedition into initiatory death will move through several landscapes of understanding. First, we'll explore how ancient mystery schools structured experiences of symbolic death and rebirth, paying particular attention to the Eleusinian Mysteries, Mithraic initiations, and Tibetan Buddhist practices. Then, we'll examine what actually happens during ego dissolution and how consciousness transforms when we temporarily relinquish our grip on individual identity. We'll discover why these experiences were considered so precious that entire civilizations built elaborate temple complexes dedicated to facilitating them. Next, we'll bridge ancient wisdom with contemporary research, exploring how modern science is rediscovering these transformative states through studies of psychedelic therapy, near-death experiences, and advanced breathwork techniques. Finally, we'll offer practical guidance for those who feel called to approach these profound states of consciousness not as casual explorers seeking an interesting experience, but as sincere seekers prepared to die to who they've been in service of who they might become. Long before written history, our ancestors recognized that consciousness could be temporarily altered in ways that revealed deeper dimensions of reality. But it was in the flowering of ancient civilizations that these practices became formalized into sophisticated systems of spiritual initiation. Perhaps the most renowned of these was the Eleusinian Mysteries of ancient Greece. For over 1,000 years, until 329 CE, these sacred rites drew participants from across the Mediterranean world. What's remarkable is that despite their prominence in the ancient world, with thousands participating annually, the central experiences of these mysteries remained largely secret. Here's what we do know. The mysteries centered around the myth of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone, who was abducted by Hades, god of the underworld. This myth followed 3 phases: descent, loss, search, and ascent, reunion that mirrored the initiate's own psychological journey. At the heart of the experience was Persephone's return from the underworld, symbolizing rebirth and the continuity of life beyond death. For Eleusis' initiates, the rites would therefore symbolize the continuous renewal of life throughout the seasons, and a promise of eternity passed on from generation to generation, writes Dalu Jones in her exploration of these ancient sites. The initiation process included purification through ritual baths in the sea, 3 days of fasting, and culminated in secret ceremonies held in the Telesterion, or Hall of Initiation. What exactly occurred in this sacred space? The historical record suggests that something was recited, something was revealed, and acts were performed. Many scholars now believe these revelations were facilitated by psychoactive substances derived from ergot, creating visionary experiences that dissolved normal boundaries of consciousness. Across the ancient world in Persia and later throughout the Roman Empire, another mystery tradition flourished in the cult of Mithras. Mithraic initiation followed patterns remarkably similar to tribal initiation rites found across the world. Young men underwent severe trials to test their courage and stamina before being admitted into a brotherhood of initiates who safeguarded their sacred knowledge. These Mithraic initiates were symbolically separated from maternal care, marking their transition from childhood dependency to adult responsibility. After this ordeal, they belonged to the club and had to safeguard its secrets carefully, for they must never be divulged to outsiders, least of all to women. The initiatory death in this tradition represented the death of the child self and rebirth as a spiritual warrior. What happens when the self temporarily dies? This is not an abstract philosophical question, but a lived experience at the heart of initiatory traditions worldwide. When the boundaries of ego consciousness dissolve, initiates typically report several common phenomena. The first is a profound sense of unity, the feeling that the separate self was an illusion, and that one's true nature is inseparable from the fabric of reality itself. This experience transcends intellectual understanding. It's direct knowledge that transforms one's relationship with existence. The second common element is an encounter with what feels like ultimate reality, whether experienced as divine light, primordial emptiness, or the ground of being. In the Eleusinian Mysteries, this was described as an overwhelming brilliance, a vision that revealed the continuous nature of life beyond physical death. A third element is the life review, where one's personal history is witnessed from a transpersonal perspective. This panoramic view of one's life appears in initiation rites across cultures and is strikingly similar to what people report during near-death experiences. According to the Bruce Grayson scale that measures NDEs, this life review often involves past events flashing before one, out of control, and can include scenes from both personal and collective history. The psychological mechanics underlying these experiences involve what neuroscientists now call disturbed bodily multisensory integration, a temporary disruption of the brain networks that maintain our ordinary sense of being a separate self located within a body. When these networks are temporarily quieted, consciousness can experience itself without its usual boundaries and filters. For the ancients, this wasn't merely an interesting psychological phenomenon, but a sacred revelation about the nature of reality and consciousness. The Eleusinian initiates emerged from their experience with a transformed relationship to death itself, no longer fearing it as an end, but understanding it as a transition within a continuously unfolding process. Beyond the surface mechanics of ego dissolution lies a deeper mystery that few traditions have articulated as precisely as Tibetan Buddhism through its practice of Phowa, or transference of consciousness at the moment of death. In this sophisticated meditation technique from the Drikung Kagyu lineage, practitioners learn to deliberately move consciousness through the body and eventually out through the crown of the skull. This isn't taught as a metaphor, but as a literal skill, one that prepares the practitioner to navigate the transition of death with awareness and intention. What makes Phowa particularly interesting is its clear articulation that consciousness exists independently of the physical form. As practitioners of this tradition explain, the human body completely renews itself at a cellular level every 7 years. But most healthy people have memories from before that time. Therefore, consciousness is not inherent in the physical form and exists independently of it. This paradox, that we are not our bodies yet experience through them, points to one of the most profound insights from mystery traditions worldwide. Identity is fluid, consciousness is fundamental, and what we experience as self is neither as stable nor as limited as we typically believe. Perhaps even more remarkable is how Phowa bridges Eastern and Western approaches. It does not require anyone to give up their existing religious beliefs or traditions. It is rather a way to move energy and consciousness through the body. This universality suggests we're dealing not with culturally relative beliefs, but with fundamental capacities of human consciousness that transcend cultural boundaries. The initiation into non-ordinary states reveals another paradox. The dissolution of self can lead to a more authentic embodiment. Those who have experienced profound ego dissolution often report returning with a deeper appreciation for embodied existence, freed from many of the anxieties and preoccupations that previously limited their engagement with life. This is the deeper mystery that by learning to die symbolically, we learn to live more fully. By releasing our grip on who we think we are, we open to who we might become. The symbolic death becomes not an end, but a passage to a more expansive identity. How do these ancient wisdom traditions translate into contemporary contexts? Remarkably, modern science is rediscovering the transformative potential of ego dissolution through several avenues that parallel ancient initiatory practices. Psychedelic-assisted therapy represents perhaps the most direct contemporary parallel to ancient mystery rites. In controlled therapeutic settings, substances like psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA are being used to supplement counseling sessions, creating altered states of consciousness that facilitate profound emotional healing and personal growth. Research indicates these experiences offer several benefits that echo the transformative effects of traditional initiatory rites. Rapid and long-lasting results, help with emotional processing, creation of new neural connections. The dissolution of rigid mental patterns allows for psychological restructuring that can prove particularly beneficial for those dealing with trauma, depression, or existential distress. Near-death experiences, NDEs, represent another contemporary doorway into the territory of ego dissolution. The characteristic elements of NDEs: detachment from the body, feelings of levitation, total serenity, security, warmth, joy, the experience of absolute dissolution, mirror the reports of initiates in ancient mystery schools. What's particularly interesting is how these experiences tend to permanently transform people's relationship with death, much as the Eleusinian Mysteries did for ancient Greeks. For those seeking more accessible approaches, various forms of breathwork offer powerful tools for altering consciousness without substances or life-threatening circumstances. From simple techniques like belly breathing to more intense practices like lion's breath, these methods combine physical breathing techniques with mindfulness to produce states ranging from gentle relaxation to profound altered consciousness. How might one approach these practices with the appropriate respect and discernment? Here, I offer 3 ethical principles for contemporary seekers. First, intention matters. Approach these experiences not as recreational diversions, but as sacred technologies for growth and understanding. The ancient mystery schools required extensive preparation precisely because they understood the power of these experiences to reshape consciousness. Second, integration is essential. The insights gained during states of ego dissolution must be carefully woven into ordinary life through reflection, community support, and changed behavior. Without this integration, even the most profound experiences risk becoming mere spiritual entertainment. Third, respect tradition while embracing innovation. The wisdom accumulated over thousands of years of ritualized initiatory practice shouldn't be casually discarded. Yet, neither should we ignore the valuable insights of modern neuroscience and psychology. The wisest path forward honors both ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. When we step back and view the phenomenon of initiatory death across cultures and throughout history, a remarkable pattern emerges. Despite vast differences in language, context, and cosmology, humans consistently discover that consciousness can temporarily transcend its ordinary boundaries in ways that reveal deeper dimensions of reality. This transcendent perspective suggests that what we call normal consciousness might actually be a specialized and limited mode of awareness, one that evolved primarily for biological survival rather than for apprehending the fullness of reality. The initiatory traditions worldwide can be seen as sophisticated technologies for temporarily shifting out of this survival mode into more expansive states of knowing. The universality of these experiences points to something fundamental about human consciousness itself, something that transcends cultural conditioning. Whether described through the language of ancient Greek mystery religions, Tibetan Buddhist practice, or contemporary neuroscience, the core experience remains remarkably consistent. The temporary dissolution of boundaries leading to a direct apprehension of interconnectedness. This perspective transforms not only how we understand ourselves, but how we relate to the collective challenges facing humanity. Many of our most pressing problems, from environmental destruction to social fragmentation, stem from the illusion of separateness that ego dissolution directly challenges. Through initiatory experiences, we discover that our individual welfare is inseparable from the welfare of the whole. The philosopher Plato, himself likely an initiate of the Eleusinian Mysteries, suggested that those who had glimpsed ultimate reality had a responsibility to return to the cave of ordinary awareness and help others. This ethic of service following spiritual awakening appears across traditions, suggesting that the fruit of initiatory death is not merely personal transformation, but renewed commitment to collective flourishing. As our journey through the mysteries of initiatory death draws to a close, we return to where we began with you, the viewer, not as a passive recipient of information, but as a potential initiate, standing before the threshold of transformation. The ancient mystery schools created elaborate architectural spaces, complex rituals, and years of preparation leading to moments of revelation. Today, the doorways to these states may look different. A therapeutic session, a meditation retreat, a carefully guided breathwork journey, but the territory beyond remains the same. The invitation extended by these traditions across millennia echoes forward to you now. Are you willing to temporarily release your grip on who you believe yourself to be? To surrender the familiar limitations of identity in service of a more expansive understanding? To die symbolically that you might live more authentically? This is not an invitation to be accepted lightly. The ancients understood that ego dissolution, while potentially liberating, can also be disorienting and even frightening without proper preparation and context. The path of initiation has always required courage, discernment, and sincere commitment. Yet for those who feel called to this journey, the potential rewards are immeasurable. As the Eleusinian initiates discovered, facing symbolic death transforms one's relationship with literal death, replacing fear with understanding and resistance with acceptance. As practitioners of Phowa have demonstrated, consciously navigating the thresholds of identity brings great equanimity, knowing that the self doesn't die with the body. Perhaps most importantly, these initiatory deaths prepare us to live more fully in the brief, precious time we have in physical form. By loosening our attachment to fixed identity, we become more available to the wonder of existence, more responsive to the needs of others, and more aligned with the mysterious unfolding of life itself. The mysteries are not merely ancient history. They are living invitations, echoing across time, calling you beyond the veil of ordinary awareness into direct communion with the extraordinary reality that has always been here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with eyes to see and hearts brave enough to die before they die. The choice, as it has always been, is yours.